This is God and Autobiography, the podcast, a dramatic adaptation and continuing discussion of the book, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin. He was a lifelong agnostic, but one day he had an occasion to pray. To his vast surprise, God answered in words. Being a philosopher, he had a lot of questions, and God had a lot to tell him.
Episode 199. Hello, and welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon, and this is episode 199. Our focus of attention for this upcoming unit of episodes centers on episode 21, God Explains the I Ching. It's in this part of the book that God tells Jerry about what may have been the earliest verbal communications between humankind and God. The ancient Chinese sought after God in a way that invited an answer, and this new way of seeking God shaped God's response. Next week, join me as we take a quick time out to celebrate our 200th weekly episode of God and Autobiography, the podcast. Here now, in preparation for our 21st Life Wisdom Project episode, is episode 21, God Explains the I Ching. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Episode 21. Were these God's earliest verbal communications? For generations, Chinese farmers in Anyang would dig up what were thought to be dragon bones and sell them for medicinal uses. In 1899, an archaeologist discovered they were etched with markings, primeval Chinese characters a millennium older than any previously known texts. On the bones were recorded a question and an answer, usually a yes or no. Will the king's child be a son? Will tomorrow be good for hunting? In prehistoric times, priests would heat the bones with red-hot pokers and divine the meaning of the resulting cracks. The oracle bones had come up in one of my first prayers. Rushing ahead without reading, I had asked simply, Lord, what were you up to with the Chinese?
You might say that the Chinese approached me. I did not approach them. They explicitly consulted me. That is the meaning of the oracle bones.
So the oracle bones were not a divine bolt out of the blue, like God speaking to Abraham. The Chinese sought divine guidance, and God responded. What began as brief inscriptions on the oracle bones grew into a classic on how to behave in various situations.
The I Ching was a simple guide to action, trying to figure out what the situation was so they could know which virtue was appropriate to it. It is a very ancient work, one of the earliest, and represents an important moment in the conversation with me.
Each section of the book opens with a beautifully drawn character, symbolic of its meaning. Lord, I seem to have two possible starting points on China, the discussion of the aesthetic appreciation of nature, or the oracle bones as the precursor to the I Ching.
The two are really one. Correctly reading the oracle bones required the aesthetic attitude, the willing suspension of desire. That is one of the hazards of consulting oracles. Too often one wants only to hear the good news or flattering reports or accept solutions with which you are comfortable. To correctly read the bones or any oracle,
For a moment, I feared I had lapsed into just listening to my own thoughts. I hope you're saying this, Lord.
to correctly read any oracle requires not being attached to specific outcomes, not preferring or not being influenced by preferring one reading over another. That requires a restful, detached attitude, not very easy to achieve at court.
With a ruler breathing down your neck.
Precisely what the marks on the bone are doing is attuning the seer to the situation, letting it speak to him. This situation wants a certain action or attitude. The seer has to quietly listen to the situation.
What did this do for your development, Lord?
It was a refinement. I had communicated with earlier human beings primarily by warnings and nudges to go one way rather than another.
With the people of Israel, you gave commandments.
Yes, but this was much earlier. It invited me to present myself not as an urging force, but just as a manifestation of the right order, and like a patient being diagnosed, to wince if something was wrong. And in a sense, it made me beautiful. Obviously, the cave painters had seen my beauty too, but that response was primarily localized to seeing the divine presence in particular animals. The questions put to the oracle bones were about larger situations and pointed ultimately to the whole of nature as a divine order.
And a beautiful order?
Precisely. And this was new to me. There are two aspects here. First, that I am the right order of the universe, which is different from just being its organizer. We're moving from regularity, the laws of nature and human nature, to a moral and aesthetic order. Second, that my order is beautiful, that it can be sensed aesthetically, that there is encoded within it a fittingness, rules of fittingness, of what is right to do in different situations. The Taoists picked up on one aspect of this, the Confucians on another.
The oracle bones led to the I Ching, or Book of Changes. Ching means an authoritative book or classic. I means changes. Human situations are always changing, and the I Ching gives a taxonomy of the 64 kinds of situations a person can confront. It was studied for its wisdom, for divination, and for identification of one's situation and how best to respond to it. You toss coins or sticks to know which of the 64 sections will answer your question. Years ago, a friend had talked me into trying it. At the time, I was drawn to a certain erotic adventure, to put it delicately. It could have been a disaster. I was looking for permission. I tossed the coins and was guided to a section. It was the Chinese equivalent of Henry David Thoreau's Simplify, Simplify. Irritated, I did not do any more I Ching. I wondered if I should try again, but I was told to read it for the original divine encounter. The book's ancient wisdom is contained in symbolic language that must be decoded. Like people for 3,000 years, I found it fascinating. But I was also told,
don't overrate the I Ching. It is not the great Ur source. It is useful, but no more useful than seeking guidance from the Bible by opening to a random passage. It is not magic.
Nevertheless, I was told,
it might be my voice that they hear.
As I started reading the I Ching, my notes record, quote, "This is what is coming to me. The sticks, represented as lines, may have originally begun as oracle devices, but the book is not an oracle. It is a way of listening to God, however conceived at that time, of seeking guidance, not predictions. The key is not in throwing sticks or tossing coins, but in letting God lead you to the relevant section." End quote. I began to understand how God's voice can be present even in a tradition that does not posit a personal God.
Congratulations, you've listened to what I have told you, which is to think, what is God trying to communicate here? Continue on that tack.
Each section of the I Ching begins with a brief poetic statement called the judgment, followed by the image, an explanation couched in symbolic language. I was guided to start with number 2, the receptive, earth, which emphasizes the feminine. In the Chinese tradition, the feminine, or receptive, or passive, is not considered less important. On the contrary, it is foundational. The section begins, "The receptive brings about sublime success, furthering through the perseverance of a mare. If the superior man undertakes something and tries to lead, he goes astray. But if he follows, he finds guidance. Quiet perseverance brings good fortune." The feminine, represented by the earth, but also by the mare, is receptive, yielding. Lord, is this about life on earth?
Yes.
And that we need to live subserviently to God and allow His will,
Yes.
as reflected in the flow.
Yes.
To prevail?
Yes, you just need to go along with my will. The feminine lays a substratum, just as the womb is crafted for life, to give proper life to a human being. The universe is the matrix of my will. It, the universe, the feminine, the receptive, the earthy, receives my will, takes it in, allows itself to be acted on by it, or to be the expressive vehicle for it.
So, Lord, this relates to the plane of action?
Sort of.
To something more like the substrate of the plane of action? Not so much action, what one does or doesn't do, as the attitude and the underlying spiritual reality in which the attitude is grounded, of an undeflected yielding to the divine will?
Yes, better. Now go back to number 1, the creative.
Different responses are called for in different situations. Sometimes the feminine response in number 2 is needed. Other times the so-called masculine response in number 1 is called for. Number 1, the creative. The creative works sublime success, furthering through perseverance. Lord, this is the same as number 2. Both say that sublime success comes from perseverance.
Yes, but this is the active side of perseverance, struggle. Not just letting oneself be the instrument of the divine, but being the agent of the divine.
I was told that in telling God's story, I had been asked to be His instrument, as in the receptive. In the context of my organizational work, I was an agent. They are two sides of the same coin. So, Lord, the active is not working on the passive. They are two quite different movements?
Not exactly. Sometimes, in a sense always, the active is working on the passive, the matrix. The matrix or substrate is receiving form and direction. It is the instrument, but if I want something done, I need not only instruments, but also doers, initiators. Part of the complexity of the world is that I do not create what I want, my designs, directly, like a sculptor working in clay. I work through people.
More like the director of a play?
Exactly.
Lord, should I move on to the next part?
Linger over this. Think about perseverance.
Well, it means persistence, follow through, not surrendering, not giving up.
not surrendering. This is the combat aspect. You have to fight in life, not against the flow, but with it, against obstacles to it.
I moved on to other reading, but about 6 months later I was guided back to the I Ching and told to pray in more detail about each section. Number 1. The creative. The creative works sublime success, furthering through perseverance. It's always helpful to know the literal meaning, and fortunately the commentators provide it in the Wilhelm edition. Furthering means creating that which accords with the nature of a given being. Perseverance is literally correct and firm. So the judgment could be restated as, here I am on my own, the creative work's sublime success, creating that which accords with the nature of the things and people involved, through correct and firm action. Lord, does correct and firm action mean apt or appropriate action?
Yes.
I sensed that the creative refers to God's overflowing into human beings and into human action. This sounds like a situation in which firm action is called for, not action based on human choice or willfulness, but action that is an instrument channeling God's overflowing presence into the situation, so that there is a natural fulfillment of all parties concerned.
Now the image.
The movement of heaven is full of power. Thus the superior man makes himself strong and untiring.
The meaning is now transparent, isn't it?
Yes, Lord. It's another way of saying the same thing. Sometimes the divine reality, the movement of heaven, is flowing into a situation in a potentially powerful way. It behooves a properly attuned person to tap into that divine presence, to make himself or herself the instrument, and to engage in strong, purposeful action in accord with it. The result will be an outcome that fulfills or actualizes the individuals and forces involved.
Go on to number 2.
Number 2, the receptive. It begins, the receptive brings about sublime success, furthering through the perseverance of a mare. If the superior man undertakes something and tries to lead, he goes astray. But if he follows, he finds guidance. But if he follows, he finds guidance seems to mean if he follows like a dance partner, yields to the situation, and listens for God's voice, it will come to him, and he'll know the right thing to do.
Yes, both situations occur. There are times you know what to do, what God wants of you, and times you do not, when the situation itself may be unclear. You don't know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, or what action would be efficacious rather than risky or counterproductive or ineffective. In those cases, flow with the situation, staying attuned to me and sensitive to the forces present and the various actors. And the right action, or lack of action, will manifest itself. Now go to number 3.
The third of the 64 sections, each providing guidance for a particular type of situation, is called Difficulty at the Beginning. Before I had a chance to read the judgment, I was told,
sometimes you don't know from the beginning what to do, and perhaps forced to act, you act wrongly, either morally or in terms of consequences. Then you need to rectify, to regain your footing, to seek advice and help from others.
I read number 4, and then went to number 5. Waiting, nourishment. Waiting. If you are sincere, you have light and success. Perseverance brings good fortune. It furthers one to cross the great water.
Now the image.
Clouds rise up to heaven, the image of waiting. Thus the superior man eats and drinks, is joyous and of good cheer. Why the title Waiting?
This is all quite simple. The task is not always to fight or act or try to mobilize one's effort to yield and follow God's will. There are times for just being, because you already are what you should be. And so is the universe. And you should enjoy, appreciate, understand that fact. The universe is a joy, not just an arena for action. It is a celebration.
Number 6 is about conflict. You are sincere and are being obstructed. A cautious halt, halfway, brings good fortune. Going through to the end brings misfortune. It furthers one to see the great man. It does not further one to cross the great water.
There are several elements here. It is not always time to cross the great water, which primarily refers to spiritual growth. One has to accept one's situation and limitations. Often the goal should be modest, just putting one foot in front of the other. See the great man, yes, that means to seek advice, but it is also a bit of a wrong instruction. It may not be a time to run around and get advice. Just hold still and mind your own business. Obstructions are meant to be there. Accept them. Build up one's own resources, inner and outer.
The next is number 7, the army. The army needs perseverance and a strong person, good fortune without blame.
This really refers not to oneself lacking strength, but sometimes it is right to follow or rely on or seek the help of a strong person, strong in forces or character or insight or whatever. That means your action is tied to his or hers, which may sometimes be mistaken, but no blame attaches to you for that.
In I Ching, I had found another way God communicates. Lord, China is overwhelming.
You are looking at a massive culture that goes back thousands of years. You cannot expect to understand their relation to me by building it up out of pieces. You need to step back and take a look at the whole.
Lord, I don't see the whole.
Yes, you do. You just have to relax and not feel you have to understand everything. Try it.
When I step back, keeping in mind the ancient classics I've read,
No, you don't have to do that. Step farther back.
When I look at I Ching, I see...
No, step farther back.
Lord, when I step way back, I see people living in a bounded, well-defined world, characterized by geographic and linguistic unity. A world in which they must yield to the elements, to the rise and fall of the rivers and the changing seasons. A world in which the organization of the whole determines whether the parts can function well. They must all function in concert, in harmony. A world that lives under the dome of heaven, of an overarching natural order, within which people are living vis-a-vis one another in similar order, harmony, and hierarchy. with rules of graciousness and deference essential to maintaining order and harmony, and either going with the flow or using stratagems to ride the flow successfully, while having an appreciation for the small objects and minute details resonating to the whole.
And now, what does that tell you about me?
You are the whole to which the parts are resonating, to which they must yield, who embodies the order they must replicate in their lives and social relations, and who is seen in the beauty and order of nature.
And what does that tell you about what it is like to be God?
You are that calm center, that framework of order, that creative source of beauty, and that inner impulse to relate to others well. Am I on track, Lord?
As I told you, you might say that the Chinese sought me, not me them. Through the oracle bones, they sought to be in tune with me. And I saw that my way of relating to humans need not only be through whispering and urging, but that people can respond directly to the physical, moral, and aesthetic order I present. That these are not separate, unrelated tasks for me, but are all of a piece. And they are one way that I communicate to people, and that people can respond to me. This, again, is a step toward my integration as a person.
So the Chinese have an aesthetic appreciation of nature and want to fit in harmoniously. But in real life, there is always a plane of action. The Taoists are one-sided and neglectful of the demands of action. The Confucianists are one-sided in the opposite direction. They address action, but fail to fit into a cosmic context. For them, it remains at a social level. But doesn't the I Ching combine the two?
Exactly. You have been reading my mind literally. I Ching is a synthesis of the two emphases of Chinese thought, harmony in the natural and in the social orders. The first is larger, a frame for the second, and more open to me. But the Taoists took it away from action. The Confucianists were preoccupied with action solely in the context of social harmony and not in accordance with my will. In I Ching, you see both. And that is why there are classic commentaries in both traditions. Both felt it was their book.
And the book has been popular ever since.
Yes, the synthesis was more appealing to the common people than the two intellectual traditions. Common people know the necessity for action. They bear its brunt. And of course, they want to know what will happen, hence casting sticks to predict. But they also want guidance, good advice. Don't have the illusion of self-sufficiency the Taoist and Confucianist have.
Polytheism, Egypt, Confucius, the Tao, the I Ching. I now knew something about the pieces of the puzzle, but hadn't a clue about how they were supposed to fit together. Was there a big picture? Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with Episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with Episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at GodandAutobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.